Happy New Year. Happy 2023. And I am, you know me, I get so geeked up when I bring a great guest on. And like I said, I brought in a neurosurgeon, a guy who has studied careers with executives. And specifically today, he's going to talk about interviewing. Interviewing. It sounds really easy until you start doing it, right? It's one of those things that has a lot more nuance to it than meets the eye. And so, one of the reasons why I brought in Jacob, specifically Jacob Warwick, as you know, think Warwick, is because he weaves straw into gold. He just told me a couple of minutes ago about a win that he has, and he has been doing this and also contributing to magazines like Fast Company and Forbes for a considerable period of time. And so, of course, we are so excited. Welcome, Jacob. Thank you again for waking up so early and showering before you came here. That's a big plus too.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't often shower in the morning, but I'm about 60 hours into a fast right now, so I haven't eaten in a while. So the things that I say may or may not be my true self. So I just want everyone to hang in there, and that I am actually very far from an actual neurosurgeon. So in case there's any confusions there, we are marketers at heart. So
right, exactly.
Don't trust everything.
So I want to get into this first issue that you claim, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, is one of the biggest mistakes that people, experience when they are interviewing. And the reason why I wanted to start with this is because most people not only are doing this, but I think that they have a perception, and we all have perceptions about what an interview should be, is that they should be somewhat responsive or even passive in that process. So talk to us about that big mistake so that they can start to employ the 5 steps that you are going to outline.
Sure. Yeah. The biggest mistake that I see, and this is across the board from executives to mid-managers to entry level, is that when you're seeking a job, this is typically true when you don't have leverage, like you're not currently in a position, but you're in a transition. You almost put the employer on a pedestal. Like, this is you, and I'm coming to you for a job, right? And this becomes more prevalent for executive leaders, where they don't assert enough dominance through the interview. And I use the word dominance pretty aggressively here, but they're really not assertive. They're not going first, and they're not leading the conversation in the direction that they need to have to best highlight their skill set. Now, you'd expect that from a junior manager or maybe a mid-level manager, right? Hey, what do you need me to do in this job? Oh, you need me to run marketing campaigns. You need me to do HubSpot. You need me to do this tactical stuff. Sure, I know how to do that. Let me tell you about my experience doing that, or at least my relevant or semi-relevant experience. And they kind of live in the past as they answer the questions. But once you get to an executive level, that's not really how it works anymore. It won't be as successful of an outcome for you, and you'll end up with a job that you essentially put your round peg into a square hole, so to speak, right? You're trying to meet the needs of the employer versus the needs for yourself. And so I think this is a trap that a lot of executives fall into, particularly over time, just because what has got them there in their career often won't get them to the next step. So while it's been okay.
Stop.
Yeah.
Please. And repeat. Please.
Okay.
This is so important.
What got you here won't get you there. So oftentimes executives will rise a ladder, sometimes at one company. They'll rise, they were a director, they became a VP, a mentor came along, brought them up to SVP, whatever that role looks like, they've risen to an elevated status. Sometimes they transition to it, but more often than not, they kind of grow through a linear path, through friends of a friend or a network, or someone that's kind of brought them along that journey. But when you're ready to make an actual transition or a transformation, who's going to bring you up, right? If it's something totally new and you don't have a network there yet, or you don't have contacts, or you want to do an industry shift, you're left kind of stuck going, okay, they can get the interviews, they know the tactical things they need to do to have the conversations, but, well, they're typically waiting for them to like, hey, ask me what I'm good at. Ask me, how am I going to lead your marketing team? How am I going to build a go-to-market stream? Just ask me, right? And when we live in this world, we're constantly living on the back foot, or we're relying on the successes of our past to explain how we're going to be great in the future. And there's a big disconnect there. So I'll pause there for a second because I do talk very fast.
And what you said is super important. So one of the things that I think is really, really important that you identified is that this is happening at all levels. And why that is so important is because they're hiring you for a leadership role. If you are an executive or somebody that is moving into a more, executive suite or C-suite level, why are you waiting for it to come at you? You absolutely, and to your point, Jacob, right? This is where that assertion works in your favor. And I want to just, ask you, is it assertion or aggression, right?
Well, there's a fine line between being assertive and being aggressive. And this is, I've been called out for confirmation bias or male bias on this. So I want to be mindful. There's a difference between assertion and aggressive. Men tend to be more aggressive. And if anyone's familiar with the book Radical Candor, they would fall more often into the obnoxiously aggressive scale. And you have a lot of orange books behind you, so I'm assuming one of those is Radical Candor.
Yeah, I know. I know of Kim Scott. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so there's a difference between being aggressive, and it can work for some, but ultimately the way that the world is going and the way that business is heading is not that direction. It's going to be closer to a radical candor state, or significantly caring about people personally, being more empathetic. And it's really not what you say, but it's how you say it. So you can say things that are very assertive and seemingly aggressive, but if you say it with the right tone and the right intention and the right empathy and compassion, and this is a good negotiation point, you're not negotiating your positions, but you're negotiating the needs of the company and the future there and how you fit into that. You can essentially get anything you want. And so as we work into negotiation strategy later, like it all starts through that getting to know you process in the interview right from the get-go.
Amazing and super important. So show up with empathy and assertion, right? Those two things are not mutually exclusive. And don't sit there expecting that you're going to be answering a bunch of questions. Lead.
Well, yeah, let me give you an example of this.
Please.
So, because I like to get real tactical, right? So oftentimes you'll be sitting in an interview and you'll say like, man, I know they're going to ask me about go-to-market strategy. Let's say I'm interviewing for a $25 million startup. Right? They're probably Series B going to Series C, 25 million. I'm a marketing leader. Let's see, they're going to ask me about, okay, the sales team's moving from founder-led to sales-led sales motion. So it's not the actual founders anymore. So they're going to go through this transition. They're going to go through all these things. I hope they ask me questions about that. And so you wait and be like, oh, let's see what kind of questions they have. Rather than them saying, all right, how would you lead the marketing team? Or what's your 6 to 12 month go-to-market plan? It's instead much more powerful for you to say, okay, look, I see that you're about 25 million in revenue. In my experience, I've seen that founders have a tough time as they transition from founder sales to sales-led sales. And marketing is often behind. The messaging needs to catch up. The team's coming up there. We're still building the systems, but they need to scale. They're immature in nature right now. They need to do X amount of things. I also see that we may have too much staff in this category, and we don't have enough marketing staff. And so we're just listing a couple of problems that we know how to solve. And ultimately, they should be saying like, yes, you're speaking directly to my pain. So you're not even being asked a question, right? Yeah. You're not being asked a question. You're asserting this is likely the case that you're in, right? And we can be overly assumptive, right? We don't want to assume the state of the company, but we're saying, I can imagine it could be something like this. And if you really want to tug at the heartstrings, like you're talking to a CEO, for example, you might say, I can imagine that the board's starting to put some pressure on you to show some impact in marketing. And what I've seen is impact in marketing should look like this. Now, it's not going to look like this in 3 months. You're going to be closer to the 9 and 12 month range. That's when our SEO is going to start ticking. That's when our PR is going to start ticking. That's when this is going to start happening. And so while you're explaining this story and asserting your experience, you're also setting expectations. So how many times have marketers come into a role and like been asked to perform miracles, right? Okay, we're going to hire a CMO. You're going to have no budget. You're going to have no staff. You're not going to have any of these things because we're giving all of that money to you specifically. Oh, by the way, we recognize that marketing is not an investment, it's a cost, right? So here's a lot of pressure. Go, weave hay into gold or straw into gold, as you mentioned for me earlier, and good luck. If you find yourself in that position, 1, you ignored the red flags of the employer. 2, you didn't set expectations. And 3, if you're miserable, it's your fault.
Oh, exactly. This was an awesome example. I'm so glad that you I should have asked you for that. Also, shout out to you, Nathan Stone, for thinking proactively, right? In my experience, right, that's a great precursor to what you're about to say, is a phenomenal assertion script. Great tip, Jacob. And he also talks specifically about this idea of forecasting.
Yeah.
Get out of the wah, 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 wah. They've looked at your resume. Hopefully.
Well, let me give you an example of this too, right? Being in an interview on the back foot, you're already behind. And I don't mean that like you can't talk your way out of it. Especially there's probably a lot of marketers in this chat. You're very good at talking and telling great stories. I'm sure that you're more than qualified to do this. But if you're waiting around to ask the question, you never know what someone's going to ask you. Right? Let me ask you right now. Tell me about your cats. Do you have any cats? What about the last vacation you went on? Right? Why, in this context, so you and we're having a conversation about interviewing right now, and I'm pulling you into a completely different direction that you weren't expecting. So were you in that moment prepared to tell a story about an animal or a vacation or anything? Now I'm just using this, hyperbolically, right? That it's completely not something that would typically come up. But for example, somebody who's being interviewed and they've had 3 or 4 recent experiences in the last 10 years, and they say, tell me about this thing you did 8 years ago directly to the T. You're like, why does that matter? First of all, so there's a lot of situations you find yourself in, like, okay, I'm on the back foot. I need to think back to that experience. A lot of people tend to be overly pleasing in an interview as well. So they want to answer right away, right?
Exactly.
So one of the things that I work on with my clients is like, look, it's not important to know what they're going to ask. It is important to have an opinion, to that point we saw earlier. It is important to have an opinion. You don't need to know what's going to be asked of you, but you need to know how to own the conversation. So if someone is to ask you a difficult question like that, you might say, wow, that was a long time ago.
Exactly.
I'm going to pause a second and take some notes on why I think that'll be relevant today and how that's going to be impactful for your business. And we also get questions that are tricky, like, hey, give me your thoughts on what the best go-to-market strategy is today. I have no insight on that other than the research I've done in the company, the few conversations I've had, right? It's too early to say. So you might answer something like, well, as you know, that's quite a loaded question, right? There's a lot of nuances that go into go-to-market. And you might say investor retention, resources that we have, team size, market, whatever. You might reel off a couple things that you're good at. Now you might say, as you know, it's a loaded question. So any answer I give you right now is going to be relatively shallow. But what I'll do is, as we go through the course of this conversation, I'll take some more notes and start consulting. You're consulting at this point. You're not answering. You say, I want to know a couple of factors. Like, let's talk about Tan Sam Song, your target audience, that what's working, what's not working. We might go into funnel metrics, sales team performance, whatever, just so I can get a stronger lay of the land. And then what I'll do is that I'll write you an email and I'll get back to you Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. This is where we control time to negotiate. Mm-hmm. I'll get back to you Friday, and I'm available at 3 o'clock Pacific to talk about go-to-market specifically. Right. So now what I'm doing is I'm not waiting for the interview to go over and be like, when are they going to call me? Oh, we'll be in touch. Right. That's pretty philandering, right? We'll be in touch. No, I'm saying I'm available Friday at 3 Pacific to talk about this question that you asked, which, by the way, is kind of stupid because I don't know anything about the go-to-market with your company quite yet. But I will talk to you on Friday. we're going to get that calendar meeting booked before we end the call here. Now, this is sales mentality. Always be closing. I'm going to have the next follow-up appointment set with you, and I'm always going to leave it on the table. So I'm not going to be left wondering, when are they going to call me, if they're going to call me. I'm setting the stage with my assertiveness here. And that goes, oh, well, wait a second, pump the brakes. I don't want to talk to you on Friday. Great, now I know there's an issue with me, and we can address it right now, versus me wondering in the ether what happened. So there's a couple of ways that we can take ownership of our follow-ups and just understanding that if you have a problem with me and you're too polite to say it, I want to know right now.
Absolutely.
Right?
So I'm going to take a break for a minute and just do a quick shout out to all these great people who are such awesome and consistent viewers of Blast and a Half. Here is Aaron, Andy York, and also Elizabeth McCauley. Happy New Year, girl. I'm so happy to see you. Always Sheena and Jen and Michelle. Awesome. Loving this so much. So now what I would really like to do is fast track you over to your 5-step interview mastery, because those are things that you guys should be writing down, taking notes, Otter AI, whatever you're using, go for this, because these are gold. The first one, create a lasting impression. And so what I would love to hear you talk about tactically is an example of what makes a lasting impression, because I think that's a very kind of squishy, ambiguous term, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand the tone that you want to set before you head into the interview. So for example, if you were to get this role, how do you want to be perceived in that role? Because now is when it starts, right? The first conversations with you is when it starts. So a lot of times, what I'll find is, and not just clients, but people in general, will tend to say what needs to be said to get the job. Now, this typically comes from a survival mindset. I think about it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, I need to go get that next job so I don't burn my retirement savings, so I don't do this. So my husband gets off my back because he's stressing me out, right? It's like, hey, babe, you got to make more money, which, you know, we all go through some personal stressors and things like that. So if we do what needs to be done and bend the will, that's how they're going to treat us moving forward. So if you do luck into this executive role without a backbone, you will continue to be treated like you have no backbone. So when you go ask for budget 6 months later and they turn you down and you try to be assertive then, now all of a sudden you're acting out of character. So I want to think about the lasting impression right from the get-go. So if you want to be treated with a backbone 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line, however it's going to look in the company, you need to have a backbone from the beginning. So the point that I'm making here is, as you enter the interview, do take a stand. You know, have an opinion to the point that was mentioned earlier. You can be wrong. You could use some terminology that says that you're open to interpretation and open to be challenged. For example, in my experience, I've done these things, which may or may not be the case with you. Maybe you can shed some light on that, and we can have a back and forth dialogue on this. But I'm asserting the conversation. I'm taking ownership, and ultimately, I want to be treated like an executive leader right here, right now. And that's why when I mentioned create a lasting impression, you should feel ultimately that confident heading into any interview that you're going to have. Now, this is particularly difficult. It's very easy to say when, hey, I'm already employed CMO, I'm totally hot shit, I'm hitting all my performance goals, whatever, right? I'm desirable, I'm in a sexy job. Look, I'm a VP at Pinterest or something. Like, I've worked with a lot of FANG executives that have this, like, honestly, they're just getting bombarded with recruiter attention. So of course you could be assertive and dominant because you can say no to anything, right? Ultimately, even those that are looking for work need to be able to set those boundaries, set that lasting impression, and say no when necessary, and help to create that next role for themselves.
So great example. And also, I love how you talked about set it from the beginning, otherwise they'll think you're out of character. Right. Number 2 is sustain a composed mindset.
Yeah, so in this, ultimately, and I think I get this because a lot of my clients work for startups, and oftentimes a startup will give you an offer that is questionable to your value. right? Or they'll treat you in a way that seems a little junior, and it's not intentional, right? Sometimes they don't know any better, right? Or sometimes you may argue that they're trying to get a steal for you value or something, or maybe the talk track is generic, like what's your 6-month go-to-market plan, and can you write it all out in the 67-slide pitch deck before your next interview, right? Can you do all this for us? And then I'm going to steal that and I'm going to run it and I'm not going to hire you, right? Which is all of our concerns. So when this stuff happens, you can't take it personal. This is what I mean by it being a composed mindset, right? Once you get to a certain level in your career, you're talking about like the top 1% of the top 1% in some ways, right? Especially, I know I went through some of the guest lists here and looked at some of their titles. You already make more money than 99% of people on the planet, regardless of if you look at the elites and stuff. You're already in the top tier, right? There's a little bit of room ahead of you if you're trying to grow, but not much, right? So you have to recognize that you're competing for the most competitive roles, right? And 90% of what's out there, if not more, is going to be less than what you're expecting.
Right.
So we're looking for a needle in a haystack, and you're going to have to go through a lot of chaff to be able to find it. So when somebody is maybe saying something disrespectful or a stupid question or asking you to do a stupid assignment, it's not anything that you can take personally. It's just, oh, I recognize where you're at today. Maybe we're not a good fit. And here's why. And that's helping you understand your boundaries and communicating those boundaries. And this is really important to do so because you're also what I call planting seeds in the market. This is especially important with recruiters or executive recruiters that talk to you, right? An executive recruiter talks to you and they might even say like, hey, we're going to pay you 400 grand. And that might be below where you're at right now. You may say, hey, this is the ballpark that I'm in now. This is where I'm focused. I'm leading teams of 50 plus, whatever. Now you're planting the seed with them that if they have a requirement with that later, they may reach out to you.
Mm-hmm.
So setting the stage early is important. But the important thing is to never have the emotional tie to it. Not everyone's out there trying to screw you or lowball you or anything. It's also your job to negotiate your value better. But ultimately, just recognize that if somebody's doing that, which is going to happen more often than not, given the status that you're in now, that ultimately that's something that you should keep considering. Right? Just keep that in mind.
Totally. That the composure, not always easy, right? Because our pride,
so much easier said than done. Right?
Our pride, ego get in the way, and Ryan Holiday, ego is the enemy. Like, stay out of that neighborhood, especially when you're in the interviews, especially even when you're networking, right? Because that can also, of course, lead to referrals, but also be part of seed planting that you don't necessarily want to at that time. So the next one, number 3, and you kind of have covered some of this, but I do want to really dig deeper, is take conversational ownership. And, explain to us what conversational ownership is. And I know that you gave a really good example, but let's go back.
Yeah, so a couple points with conversational ownership is that you don't know your career quite like, or you know your career a lot better than anyone else is going to. More specifically, you know where your career is going more than anyone else is. So if I'm going to look at your background, all I'm going to see is the past. I'm going to see a stamp of the past. Whether you updated LinkedIn yesterday or not, that's still the past, right? Your resume is a collection of the past in a lot of ways. So it's important to take conversational ownership to steer the conversation toward the future, because we don't want to do more of the same. If anyone here, I'm sure, I don't know if you could do a show of hands or anything, how many here would say they have a growth mindset? I looked through the list. There's a lot of growth leaders here, a lot of marketing leaders, a lot of startup leaders, a lot of tech leaders, right? Tech is typically on the cutting edge or the innovative side or whatever you want to say, like insert buzzword here, right? If we're concentrating on what we did even 18 months ago, we're way behind in the market. Like data is refreshing like every 12 months or so right now. Like all of the world's information is being refreshed. So if you're going to market with something you did a long time ago, expect to work for a company that's behind too, right? So those are some things to be mindful of. So it's your job to steer the conversation forward. And a lot of this is saying like, look, it's great that I have these past stories and we can go into detail here, but what's more important is what do the next 6 months look like for you? And I've already assumed that you were going to be going through these challenges, so I can ask really pointed questions about these challenges. And I want to get the interview talking about the future, not the past. We serve nothing to gain with the past. We do have knowledge, we have experience on how we can execute our game plan to build the company up or whatever. But we can't replicate that necessarily, because all of the situation, all the cards are different. So we want to get the interviewer talking about the future and then saying terms like, oh, in 3 months when we solve this issue, when we do this together. So now we're doing a forward-thinking psychology, and I'm already assuming you're going to hire me by saying when we accomplish this. And another tip for everyone here is if you're doing gauntlet interviews, it's what I call them when you do a panel interview, you're using everyone's name. Oh, when Karen and I get to working on this together. Oh yeah, I was talking to Jim a little bit. He mentioned that this might have been a challenge. So I'm planning on working with him to do this. Right? So we're being assumptive that we're going to get the job, but we start consulting and solving problems right from the interview. And then all of a sudden they keep wanting to talk to you because you're solving problems, and they go, oh shit, we never signed a contract with them. We need to do the offer. And that helps you differentiate yourself from your competition.
Oh, this is so great, because when you also were giving that example of using other people's names, we know that names are super important, but you're already embedding yourself in the team, right?
Right.
You're on peer versus that, slovenly kind of like beggar person. Oh, can I work here? You're already planting that seed. So more seed planting. I love this. I love this.
And I already answered your next 2 questions with that too.
Right.
Or the next 2 points. Like, you should be driving the interview.
Yes.
Like, this is how you drive the interview. And the number 1 hack is pretend you already have the job. From the very first interview, you see, I know there's a lot of CMOs here. You're interviewing for your next CMO job. Pretend you already have the job. There's no pressure in the role, but you don't know what to do because you don't know anything about the company other than some of the research that you've done. Right? So what questions are you going to ask to do a good job? That's what we need to get into right now. And the other hack for this is maybe you have the job, but you're a consultant. So you have to earn your keep month by month. You have a monthly retainer. You're in a month-to-month contract, and your livelihood's at stake. What value would you give to make sure that contract is re-signed so you can pay your mortgage and take care of your family? If you're thinking in these contexts, you're going to be providing enough value to keep the conversation going.
Yes. So the next 2 points we can kind of collapse in any kind of way about being the solution and leading the next steps, because this whole be the solution thing is it's monumental, right? And most people don't think of themselves as a solution to a problem in their careers, in their job search. They look at a role, they look at a resume, they look at paper when there's so much more behind the scenes, because what they're going to tell you on their website or what they're going to tell you in a job description is not even close to the tip of the iceberg. So how do you get to be the solution when you're not wholly aware of what the problems are?
Well, so ultimately you need to know what the problems are, right? This is just research. This is what it means to prepare for an interview.
Yes.
It's not just looking at Crunchbase and looking at LinkedIn and reading all of the like, that's great. One of the things you can do, this is a kind of a hack, you can look at hiring patterns on LinkedIn and know the problem someone's going through. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons that big tech companies are vague in their job posts. So you'll see Google, Amazon, Facebook, they're pretty vague in what they hire. They're all hiring at L7, whatever the hell that means. It's $500 to $1 million a year. Great. And they're pretty vague in their posts. All they're doing is saying, hey, we want people to apply for this, and we want to interview them and put them into the roles that they need to be in. One of the reasons they do this is so Amazon doesn't know Google's strategy, Google doesn't know Amazon's strategy, because you can see the hiring patterns. But at smaller companies, you can see this very clearly. So you'll look at, oh, just raised Series B, new sales hire, 4 new AEs. Oh, they don't have product market fit yet, right? They're getting pressure from the investors to hire sales to prove product market fit so they can get their next round. Because if they don't execute that goal, they're going to miss.
Quick question. Are you finding that information on the Insights tab?
Basically,
yeah.
Like, you don't even need to have LinkedIn Premium to do this. You could just go look through the employees and see their tenure. Like, there's a ton of data that you make assertions of. Like, Oh, I've seen a startup that's gone through this phase, or even a company that's already at 100 million. Oh, they brought in a new business unit leader. They've hired these specific backgrounds. You can dive, oh, this guy has a finance background. This gal has a fintech background. This one has a straight tech background. They're making a fintech play, right? Now I know, as I'm being the solution, oh, I see that you're adding a lot of financial expertise. Like, that's some deep insight. That's not the typical, what do you want to do in 3 months? No, it's, I see you're adding a lot of finance insight. I think it would make sense if you start going after this market. Here's why, right? So this is how you can prove to yourself as being the solution. So I'm a little off track here, but I just, this is such a valuable point.
It's not at all, because what I want to say is this is where the muscle gets its best exercise, right? Preparing for interviews is, I mean, if you're going to an interview, you've already done a lot of heavy lifting. Don't drop the ball now, right? Make like a detective, make like a bloodhound, and start scraping the information that is 100% available to you. Like, this is not, like you said, you don't need to be a premium user, but you do need to be able to see the patterns.
Most of these executives will be, right? They are open to investing in themselves and in their career, which I think is important. Now, there's one other point that I want to make that I know is going to be pretty impactful here, and that is the hidden job market. Because there's a lot of folks in this room that are elevated in status. You're elevated to a point where companies don't often post these roles anymore. How the hell am I supposed to find them, right? And so the generic answer is, you should be networking, right? Cool, great. I know how to network. We're in these meetings. I'm meeting with you. I'm part of Portfolio Rocket, whatever it is, right? I'm joining people. I'm getting out there. I'm meeting. And this is, I think you're one of the things that you talk about is, you know, how do you find your next opportunity without ever having to apply for a job, right? So we recognize, if we can recognize the patterns that a company's going through, we can recognize when you're most optimally aligned for that role. So you might say, they don't have a CMO yet. When's the best stage for a CMO? Oh, well, they're going to unbundle the CRO role. They have marketing and customer success and sales running under a CRO. At Series C, they're going to unbundle that because that's an unruly position. That's when the CMO is going to come in and dominate, and that's where my expertise is. That's when I'm going to reach out and make connections with that staff, right? And start that conversation, whether it be with an investor or an inside friend or cold outreach, that doesn't matter. Now, I'll also give another example that you can turn lesser roles into greater roles. And this is where real executives create the job that they want. They don't expect to find it, because you're not going to find it, to be honest, right? You're not going to find it. If you're a perfect lock and key match, it's super rare that you're going to get through the ATS, you're going to get the cold, you're going to go through all of these low percentile efforts to actually talk to the right person to close the deal. It's borderline impossible. I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it, because anything can happen, but ultimately you're not going to find the perfect fit. You have to create it. So I'll give a quick example. I was interviewed for a content manager position off of an article that I wrote for Entrepreneur. This was 7-8 years ago. Content manager position, $70,000 a year. Now, I was currently making $250,000 a year as a VP of marketing. And why would I ever entertain a content manager position?
Right.
Right, why? So I go through the interview process, because I can't say no to things, obviously. So not a good leadership tip, but just in general, I don't say no to things. I explore opportunities. So I go through this interview step. They have a CMO. They're hiring bloggers. Like, they think that blogs are going to help them with their go-to-market at this particular stage, and they don't have the right product market fit yet, necessarily. So I go through the interview process, and they get to the final stage, and they make me an offer. And I'm not upset that they're offering me 70 grand. I knew that up front. It was a content manager position. But what I recognized was, you don't need to be hiring a content manager in this context right now. So as I'm doing final interviews with the CEO and the CMO, I'm mentioning this. You don't need this right now. You need a product marketing leader first. Then you're going to need this. Then you're going to need demand gen, and you're going to need content to support that person in this order. And when I was talking to the recruiter, I said, look, with all due respect, they're going to fire the CMO in 4 to 6 months.
Oh, that was bold.
It was, well, I mean, it was with the recruiter directly. It wasn't with the company specifically. I said, with all due respect, I would be surprised, and say it exactly like that. Yeah. I'd be surprised if the CMO was here in 6 months. 3 months later, I got a call and said, hey, you know, I want to talk to you again. We're hiring for a head of marketing, a VP of marketing, and we want to talk to you. We let go of so-and-so, and we dismantled that team, and we're ready to rebuild. And then I took that role, as the VP of marketing and built the team out how I saw fit. And then we got acquired a year later.
Right.
So there was,
I call this augmenting, right?
it was very bold in like, I don't recommend, like that's probably obnoxiously aggressive. Like I've always been overly confident for my actual skill level, which I'm sure there's plenty of people, especially women, just laughing at me like, ha ha ha.
I'm not
right?
laughing. No.
No, but there are many, they're like, that guy's an asshole. But I've been overconfident in a lot of ways because I've always thought that the best way to move up is to reach a couple rungs up on the ladder, get my hands slapped, and then settle into place while learning along the way. Right. So that's kind of my philosophy on that.
Wow.
But it's just an example that you can turn things in. Basically, them saying, I want a content manager is them raising a hand. We have a challenge. We think content's going to solve it unless we're informed otherwise. Right. Now, this typically works better at smaller companies than larger companies. Larger companies typically know what they want. So if you're trying to pull this off at like a Comcast or an IBM, good luck. Right. It's going to be significantly trickier. But knowing the talent that's in this room listening to this conversation, I bet you can do it.
That's an important caveat. I also, back to you, Nathan, I have written job description proposals many times. It's a leadership hack to find what you want for sure. So absolutely. You know, don't be afraid to create the job description that you know there's there's an opportunity for, but don't stop there, right? Use that as part of your language.
I have another hack that might be useful for this group.
Sure.
If you're out there preparing to interview and do this, find some roles that you think are a great fit, and copy the lines that you think are they speak closest to your experience, and paste them in a separate doc. And then go find another role and copy the pieces that you think fit best in that role, and start to create. I call this a Frankenstein job description, right? And so you might like some elements of a CMO role, some elements of a CRO role, some of the CEO role, whatever. And you start taking down these messaging points. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a story around that in our narrative to show that that's what we're going to do in our next role. So we can design the exact job description that we want when we have the opportunity to do so. We set those expectations up front. And I call these points, these are arrows in a quiver. So picture you have a quiver of stories. And you're going to say, oh, here's the one that I want to pull out when I want to lead a team of 10 and mentor them. When I want to see, go-to-market growth at $20 million stage, here's the story I'm going to share. Right? We prepare all these narratives ahead of time. We jot them down. Like I've had clients send me 50-page documents of every story they've ever had before, and I've sifted through them, belaboring it. First, I was annoyed by it. Now I love it. And I'm like, great. We have so much material to work with that we can tighten up a bunch of stories. You're going to feel exceptionally confident in your next interview because you can steer the conversation any direction you need to.
Oh my goodness. So I want to first and foremost, huge thank you to you, Jacob, for everything that you've dropped on us today. And like I said, I saw somebody in the comments, it was Tim Hogan said, this is Jedi level. And
that's a great new nickname.
Yeah. So,
can I be the Jedi interview guru of LinkedIn and then send you fluffy posts every day?
Yeah, but other people too. So many gems. This is a great idea. You know, all of these amazing shout outs. Amy Horner, the Assumptive Close. So huge thanks from me.
I'm excited because I'm looking at their little LinkedIn pictures popping up, and I can recognize like all of these folks have so much more like industry experience than I do that it's very validating for me to see these great executives with shout outs. So thank you so much.
Too. Yes. So, you're getting the love, Tiffany, like so much love, even Dan Roth, woohoo, Carrie Martin. Yeah, you're getting some big love. And that's what we really want. So if you at any time, please not only connect with Jacob on LinkedIn, of course, but check out his website, right? Think Warwick. This guy is, like I said, he's the neurosurgeon. He broke it all down and extracted all the important information and got rid of all the clogs in the arteries. So, Jacob, hang around for just 1 minute after this because I absolutely need to gush a little bit more. But
I really do recommend the blog. So just go to the blog page. It's not one of those fluffy hey, here's all the high level stuff that I could get from ChatGPT. Right, or some AI nonsense. The blog is very personal and I'm a little emotional with it. I call it Execs in the City, so it's a little bit controversial and provocative. I really like to say it like it is, or at least how I think it is. But I've organized it on the site. So if you're going through an interview, you're going through a negotiation, I have some 1,000 to 2,000 word articles on step-by-step of what to do. Everything that I learn from other executives and I want to share for free. So I'm not really like, it's great if we work together, fine, but I want to provide everything that I have for free. And I'll be working on my next article today. So I send a new article out every Thursday.
And they're amazing. So because I love you so much, Amy Horner, here are the wrap up of the 5 steps to mastery. Create a lasting impression, sustain a compound mindset, take conversational ownership, drive the interview, and be the solution. All right. Yay, everybody. I hope that you have a great Wednesday, the first of the year. And I'll see you guys next week when we're talking about AI and your career. So looking forward to that. And Jacob, just hang out for a couple minutes and we'll go from there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.